Are you happy? Are you really happy now? Well, this is Bill Whittle now, and I'm Scott Ott. And Bill, the latest survey from the Happiness Research Institute says that the United States is slipping precipitously in the ranks of the nations of the world when it comes to happiness on a certain group of indices that they consider to foster a happy society. And first of all, I just want to let you know, number one in the world is Finland. And out of the top 5 happiest countries in the world, out of the top 10, 5 of them are Nordic countries. The United States comes in at a number 19, falling in the last 2 years from number 14. Great Britain, I think, is 15. Bill, first of all, before we get into the details of what this is about, how does it strike you? Does it seem consistent with your experience that happiness in the United States has slipped in recent years?
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. And if I were to put a finger on it, I would say the reason people seem to be less happy now is because people are stressed all the time over politics. And I think the number one cause of decline in happiness in the United States is not a question of Republicans or Democrats in power. It's a question of politics invading every single aspect of our lives. There's nothing now that we can do from sending our kids to school or anything. All of it is political. All of it's political all the time. And it makes people tired. They're constantly having to defend their values in areas where their values should not have to be defended because the government should have nothing to do with any of these things. Added to this is the sense that at least for many people, the idea of the American dream, where you go out and work hard and save some money, maybe buy a house or something, is made immeasurably more difficult by the government. The amount of regulations that we have to comply with here, just at this little mom and pop fortune telling company, are just staggering. And so it's harder to go about your business. There's more taxes, more insurance. I don't want to paint a completely idyllic picture, but seriously, honestly, if you were to look at American happiness, let's say 50, 60 years ago, I wouldn't have to deal with Blue Cross and Blue Shields and co-pays and all of this nonsense. I'd go to the doctor who I've known since I was born. He would say, that's a sprained ankle. Just stay off it for a while. Here's some tape and some aspirin. That'll be $50. Now I have to check with my, HMO to find out which doctor and which providers. They're not doctors anymore; they're healthcare providers. And then I go down to this gigantic medical center, and I'm sitting on this factory assembly line. I go into the waiting room. I sit there for a while. I go into the medical office. I sit on the butcher paper. The guy comes in. He says, "That looks like a sprain, but we're going to have to run an MRI just to be sure, because if he doesn't run an MRI and I hurt myself worse, then he's at risk for malpractice, and what used to cost $50 is now $5,000. Just as one example, that's just one example of the degree that life has become more complicated and more of a hassle. And it doesn't have to be this way, but it is.
Well, you pointed out a couple of things that they indicated in the Happiness Research Institute's study of the world's happiest countries. And a couple of them include, or the reason why the United States has slipped in the rankings are the rising level of all kinds of addictions, from social media addictions to pornography to alcohol to opioids to food. Social divisions, which is one that you highlighted there, political divisions, partisan divisions, and dealing with or declining confidence in government. Now, this is all happening in the United States, apparently not happening in the Nordic countries, which have quite a social support network, at least at last report. What do you think you can, this is the only country on earth, really, that was founded on the idea of the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely correct.
Why are we so far down in the rankings vis-a-vis places that you would say have a flawed model of government?
Okay, well, first of all, again, some perspective. When you say we're so far down in the rankings, that would put us in the top 10, I would think. Top 10%.
19 out of 154 countries or something like that.
No, it's more like 211 or something when you include territories. But in any event, it's not like we're at the 50% mark or anything. We're still in the top 10%, and it has slipped, and no question. I'm going to say something that just flew into my mind, and I don't mean this to sound as cruel as it is going to come out. This is just how the thought occurred to me. One of the reasons that the Nordic countries are so happy is because those people are born into this kind of benign slavery. And when I say benign slavery, the Scandinavian countries are, these people are born into a world where the government takes care of you for your entire life. And so it's really no skin off of their icy cold noses to lament freedoms that they never had in the first place. We're watching a great deal of the American dream decaying in front of our eyes, and that makes people unhappy. As far as this country goes, you know, I think if you were to plot happiness, if you had a happiness detector, and you could look at the country from orbit, I think you would find that the same thing is happening with happiness as with gun violence, and for the same reasons. If you were to get into geostationary orbit and look at the country in terms of murders and violence, what you will see is a murder-free country that is in fact murder rate lower than Belgium, lower than Switzerland, over the huge, vast area of the country, but then begins to get concentrated in urban areas and cities where the murder rate becomes so high that it actually knocks our total murders to unreasonable heights. But
that's where the people are, Bill.
But this is my point. I mean, this is my point. America's murder rate, last time I checked, was 4.2 per 100,000. But in Plano, Texas, it's 0.1 or 0.6 or something. Plano, Texas is safer than Switzerland, and I'll bet it's happier than Switzerland, and I'll bet it's all of these things. And the misery index or the unhappiness index or whatever is taken as a measure of a population, and as more and more people live in cities, they're going to become more and more unhappy. City life is not as happy as country life for a number of reasons. But the most important of which is there are no social ties. They did a study on happiness, and not only happiness, but success in life in terms of achieving your goals, not like how much money you made, just do you feel like you've led a worthwhile life? And also they've correlated against the number of people who became criminals, went to crime, and so on. Do you know what the single greatest correlator was in terms of all of these measures of happiness?
I did not see the study, no.
Okay, well, it turns out that families that have dinner with each other have essentially zero unhappiness. I know it sounds strange, but it's also, at the same time, it's also blindingly obvious that that's the case. Families that sit down and have dinner together, they're not watching TV or they're not doing anything, you sit down and talk to each other, which is what used to happen all the time. I remember the advent of TV dinners, thinking, this is awesome. I get to have dinner and watch TV at the same time. It's the beginning or the end. Families that sit down and have dinner and talk to each other are much happier because it provides the fundamental foundation for human happiness, and that is a sense of security and worth. All of the addiction problems that you mentioned are the result of the same dynamic. Addiction to narcotics, to alcohol, gambling, sex, food, all of these addictions are symptoms. That's not the disease, they're symptoms. The disease is the addictive personality type. And that's why these 12-step programs work so well all across the board. The 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous, the same 12 steps for Narcotics Anonymous. Because they're not dealing with drug abuse or alcoholism, they're dealing with the addictive personality, and the addictive personality is the result of a childhood where there was insufficient nurturing, insufficient sense of caring and physical closeness and so on, which gave that child at an early age, I mean by the time you're 5 or 6 is pretty much done, gave that child a sense of fundamental insecurity about the world. Like, I don't know if I'm going to survive, I don't know if I'm going to find dinner, and mom and dad are screaming at each other and so on, or whatever. And so families that sit down and have dinner together provide individual people with the sense that, okay, I can go out and do something really incredibly stupid, or I can just run into a patch of really bad luck. And maybe I won't work for 2 years and I have to come home and live with my parents. But I have parents to come home and live with. And it's not torture, that the parents have let me fail enough to be able to deal with failure, but at the same time they've given me a sense that yes, you're going to fall, sometimes you're going to get hurt, we have to let you get hurt, but you're never going to fall hard enough to really hurt you because we'll step in and catch you before that happens. It's something really that simple, Scott. And I would begin to suspect that this is just a sheer observation off the top of my head, But if I had to guess, I would say one of the reasons why of the top 10 countries, 5 of them are Scandinavian. My guess would be because in those countries there are enormously long periods of time where it's dark and cold. And people have to spend a lot more time indoors with each other, talking to each other. There are no serious metropolitan areas in the Scandinavian countries, right? I mean, you can name Stockholm, and you can name maybe 1 or 2 other cities, Oslo in Norway, and Narvik, a couple, but virtually all of those people are suburban people, and all of these factors seem to be universal. And so as America moves more and more into cities, the fatherless rate goes up. That means that the sense of hollowness goes up, which means the sense of addiction goes up. And when addiction goes up, crime follows, because you've got to have drugs to fill that hole. And when you're ready to deal drugs with people, you're going to get people shot. And all of this stuff comes down to the disintegration of the family, because when inner cities like Baltimore in the 50s, even in the 40s and 30s, when those were black and white families living next to each other, and dads of both colors had a good job at the factory, and they came home for dinner, and one person could make enough living to feed the family, places like Baltimore were just fantastic little neighborhoods. People just get outside and gather on the street. Hey, how you doing? And the race thing didn't matter too much, because people were fundamentally fulfilled.
Let me follow up with a final question here, and we've got to keep the answers short because I've got about 3 or 4 more hours of video gaming to get in before I go to work. The UK Daily Mail is where I saw this story, and I was surprised to find it's not exactly a bastion of conservatism. I was surprised to find mention of the fact that one of the things that you could attribute to Finland's #1 ranking in the World Happiness Survey is the fact that Finland's population is relatively homogeneous.
Yes.
They pointed out of 5.5 million or so people who live in Finland, only about 300,000 of them originate from other countries. And what role do you think that plays, just by the United States, by very nature of the melting pot atmosphere, encouraging immigration and bringing more and more people from all around the world? Is it just kind of our lot in life that we can't possibly be as happy as Finland?
I don't think that really has much, if anything, to do with it. Japan is equally homogenous, and the Japanese people are miserable. The United States, when the United States was about legal immigration, hard work, and taking care of yourself and your family and the American dream, the mixture of different peoples is what gave us the vitality that we have. I'm going to pick the most trivial example that comes to mind because it's much, much, much deeper than this. But just as a trivial example, the best Chinese food in the world is American Chinese food. The best Mexican food in the world is made by Mexicans in America. And you can go all the way down the line. That's because they're bringing their recipes and they're bringing their traditions and so on, but they're using just much better quality materials. And that is just a small example of the dynamicism that is built into the United States. There's a common expression in Hollywood, not so much an expression as a just sort of a general rule of thumb, and it generally holds true. And that general rule of thumb is the more vitriolic the set while you're shooting, the better the movie's going to be. In other words, all of the movies that we all think of are really great were not terribly fun places to be, mostly because you had enormously talented artists who were going head to head with each other. And this creates a lot of friction and a lot of kind of unpleasantness. But what it also does, and I'm using this as a metaphor for the whole country, is when you are confronted with an opinion different than yours, but it's produced or presented in a way that's compelling, it makes you stop and think. And then you begin to get a fusion of these ideas, which were better than either one of them in the first place. And that's ideally how this country should work. If we were to solve the family problem, if we were to have families that stayed together and they don't have to be Quakers or Amish or anything, but if I could basically just mandate that every family in America had a father and a mother and had dinner together with the kids. I don't care what color they are. I don't care about their religion. I don't care about any of that stuff. Doesn't matter. If the entire country was that way, and it used to be almost exclusively that way, we would be a far, far happier place, because all of the problems, the murder, the addiction, the video games, all of it, the porn, all of it, is downstream of that lack of fundamental worth that's imparted by having a loving family who's there and who you can talk to.
Well, that atmosphere of a competition of ideas is exactly what Bill Whittle Now is all about. It is bringing the best ideas from both sides and letting them have this contest in a relatively civil forum, so that you can think for yourself. And we shock Bill with these questions every day because it shows what you have to do in the marketplace every day. You don't get a briefing that comes to you before you have a political discussion. You have to be ready, not just to defend your ideas, but to be able to have a conversation about ideas.
And promote them and can convert people and talk about a loving family. That's what this organization is.
And doing that in a winsome way is what we're all about here. So we really appreciate the members at BillWhittle.com who have made that possible. They have become a family to us, not just because they contribute on a monthly basis to make this possible, but because of their contributions of encouragement and grace and the way they interact with us and share ideas with us as we share ideas with them. If you'd like to become one of those members and become part of this happy family of liberty, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.